territory between the river settlements and the mountain range. A rancher's isolated homestead sat in the path of the worst storm anyone had seen in years. Kalen Reed was boarding up his windows when he found something that shouldn't have been there. A child, Apache, no more than 8 years old, bleeding and terrified, crawling toward his porch. But what Kalen didn't know was that protecting this boy from the hurricane would bring something far more dangerous than any storm. By sunrise, 400 warriors would surround everything he owned, and the choice he made in the next 30 seconds would either save his life or end it. Because sometimes the deadliest thing in the frontier isn't the weather, it's who's watching when you think you're alone. The sky had that sick green color that makes animals go quiet. Callan hammered the last plank across the window frame, splinters catching in his calloused palms. The wind was already pulling at his hat, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. 3 miles south, a funnel cloud touched down and tore through empty grassland like a knife through canvas. He had maybe 20 minutes before it reached his property. He'd survived alone out here for 7 years, kept his head down, spoke to no one. The nearest settlement was a half-day's ride, and that's exactly how he wanted it. This land was his sanctuary and his prison, a place where the past couldn't find him because he'd buried it so deep even he couldn't dig it up most days. The sound stopped in mid-step, a scraping, dragging, something moving against the dirt near the south side of the cabin. Kalen's hand went to the blade on his belt before his mind caught up. Could be a wounded coyote. Could be debris, already flying in the wind. Could be nothing, but his gut knew better. 7 years of solitude teaches a man to trust the sounds that don't belong. He rounded the corner and his breath caught. The boy was maybe 50 feet away, crawling on, his hands and knees, one leg dragging behind him at an angle that made Kalen's stomach turn. Apache, no question. The child wore traditional dress, leather still painted with symbols Ken didn't understand. Dark hair whipped across his face as he pulled himself forward, inch by agonizing inch, toward the only shelter visible for miles. Their eyes met. The boy froze. His small chest heaved with exhaustion and pain. But his expression shifted instantly to something harder. Older pride, the kind that runs so deep it won't bend even when a body's broken. Kalen stood there with a hammer still in his hand, rain starting to spit from the churning sky. The wind screamed between them. Every instinct in his body pulled in different directions. The frontier had rules, unspoken but absolute. You didn't cross certain lines. Apache territory, settler territory, invisible borders that got men buried when they forgot where they stood. This boy was on the wrong side, or Kalen was, depending on who you asked. 3 miles south, the tornado lifted and touched down again closer. Now, Kalen could hear it. A freight train made of air and rage bearing down on everything in its path. The boy's eyes never left him, waiting, expecting rejection, maybe expecting worse. Callan thought about the locked room in the back of his cabin, the one he never opened, the tiny boot still sitting by, the door inside, caked in mud from a day 7 years gone, the silence that followed him from that room into every corner of his life. He dropped the hammer. 20 feet separated them. The boy tried to pull himself backward away, but his injured leg betrayed him. A small sound escaped his throat, pain he couldn't quite suppress. Kalen crossed the distance in 4 strides, bent down, and scooped the child into his arms. The boy fought him. Small fists hammered against Kalen's chest, surprisingly. Strong for someone half dead from exhaustion and injury. He was shouting something in Apache words Kalen couldn't understand, but recognized as curses. Easy, easy. Kalen's voice came out, rougher than he intended. I'm not going to hurt you. The boy didn't stop fighting until they crossed the threshold. Then he went rigid, eyes darting around the interior of the cabin like he'd been carried into a trap. The door slammed shut behind them as the wind hit with full force, and the world outside began to tear itself apart. Ken set the boy down on the wooden floor near the fireplace, the only area reinforced enough to survive what was coming. He grabbed blankets, water, anything that might help. The child watched him with those fierce, unblinking eyes, ready to bolt despite the broken leg, despite the storm that would swallow him whole. Lightning split the sky. Thunder answered. The walls groaned under the pressure. And somewhere in the darkness beyond his property line, something Kalen couldn't see was already moving. Hundreds of somethings closing. And on his location with purpose that had nothing to do with the storm and everything to do with the decision he just made. But he didn't know that yet. All he knew was that the boy in front of him was terrified, hurting, and entirely at his mercy. And for the first time in 7 years, Kalen Reed had someone to protect besides himself. The first window shattered. Glass exploded inward. The hurricane had arrived. The cabin shuddered like it wanted to tear itself from the foundation. Kalen pressed his weight against the door as wind howled through the gaps, carrying debris that sounded like gravel against the walls. The boy sat rigid against the stone hearth, fingers digging into the blanket Kalen had wrapped around his shoulders. Your leg, Kalen pointed at the twisted ankle, swollen purple beneath the torn leather of the boy's moccasin. I need to look at it. The child pulled back, jaw set. He said something sharp and Apache, a clear refusal. Look, I know you don't trust me. Ken kept his voice level, his movements slow, but that ankle's getting worse. If it's broken. Another string of Apache words. Faster this time. The boy's hand moved to a small knife at his waist, fingers curling around the handle. Callan raised his palms. All right, I won't touch you. They sat in tense silence while the storm raged. Rain hammered the roof like fists demanding entry. Something heavy slammed into the north wall. A piece of fence maybe, or part of the lean to where Ken kept his mare. He hoped she'd broken free and run for higher ground before this hit. The boy's breathing had changed. Shorter, shallower, pain or fear. Probably both. His eyes kept darting to the windows, too. The door, calculating escape routes that didn't exist. Smart kid, survivors. Instinct. Kalen moved slowly to the hearth, struck flint until sparks caught on the tinder. Small flames spread, pushing back the darkness that pressed in from all sides. The warmth seemed to ease something in the boy's posture. Just slightly. You got a name? Callan asked, knowing he wouldn't get an answer, but needing to fill the silence with something other than destruction. The boy stared at him, unblinking. Mina's Galen. He pointed at his own chest. Kalen, nothing. Just those dark eyes measuring him, judging whether he was threat or temporary shelter. The southern window exploded inward. Glass and wood fragments sprayed across the room. The boy scrambled backward, injured leg forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. Kalen threw himself across the space, shielding the child's body with his own as debris pelted them both. Rain poured through the opening like a waterfall turned sideways. The wind that followed carried the full weight of the tornado's outer edge, a force that wanted to peel the skin from the earth itself. Kalen grabbed the heavy wooden table, dragged it toward the breach, wedged it against the frame. It wouldn't hold long, but might buy them minutes. When he turned back, the boy was watching him differently, still wary, still ready to bolt, but something had shifted. Kalen had put himself between the danger and the child without hesitation. That kind of action spoke, louder than words in any language. We need to get lower. Kalen pointed at the floor near the hearth, where the stone foundation went deepest. Storm cellars outside. Can't reach it now. This is the safest spot we've got. The boy seemed to understand the gesture, if not the words. He pulled himself across the floor, teeth gritted against the pain in his ankle, and positioned himself in the corner where two stone walls met. Kalen grabbed every blanket he owned, built a barrier around them both. The cabin groaned and creaked. Somewhere above, shingles tore away in sheets. The roar outside had become constant, a living thing that swallowed every other sound. "We're going to be all right," Callan said, more to himself than the boy. "Just need to wait it out." The child's hand shot out suddenly, gripping Kalen's arm with surprising strength. He pointed at the ceiling, then made a gesture, fingers spread, moving in a circle. Kalan understood. The eye. The boy was asking if they were in the eye of the storm. "Not yet," Kalen said. "This is just the edge. The worst is still coming." The boy's expression didn't change, but his grip tightened. And in that moment, Callan realized something that made his blood run cold. This child wasn't just lost. He was expected. Somewhere out there, people were looking for him. People who would know exactly where the storm had pushed him. People who would come. The question was whether they'd arrive as rescuers or as something far more dangerous. The world outside had become nothing but violence. The tornado passed close enough that Ken felt the pressure change in his skull. A sensation like being underwater too deep. His ears popped. The boy pressed his hands over his own ears' face. Contorted. Then the main support beam cracked. The sound cut through even the storm's roar. A deep, splitting groan of wood that had held for 20 years, giving up all at once. The center of the ceiling sagged. Dust and splinters. "Rain down. Move." Callan grabbed the boy, ignoring his cry of pain, and hauled them both toward the hearth corner. The beam came down 3 seconds later, crashing through the table, through the floor where they'd just been sitting. Rain poured through the new gap in the roof, turning the cabin's interior into a muddy chaos. They huddled in the only protected corner left. Kalen's back pressed against stone, the boy tucked against his chest. Both of them soaked and shaking. The fire had drowned. Darkness pressed in, broken only by lightning that turned everything white for frozen moments. The boy was trembling, not from cold, from terror held at bay by pure stubbornness. His small body was rigid, fighting the fear with everything he had, refusing to show weakness. Even now, Ken understood that feeling. He'd warned himself for 7 years. "Hey," he kept his voice low. "Steady. You're doing good. Real good." The child looked up at him, rain streaming down both their faces. Callan found himself speaking, not sure if it was for the boy or for himself. "I had a son once, about your age." The words came out rough and used. He liked storms, thought they were exciting. Used to stand at the window watching the lightning. The boy's eyes stayed locked on his face. There was a flood. Flash. Flood came out of nowhere. "I was checking the fence line. Too far away." Kalen's throat tightened. He went into the water trying to save her dog. By the time I got there, he stopped. The boy reached out slowly, placed his small hand on Kalen's arm, not gripping this time, just resting there, a gesture that needed no translation. They sat in that shared silence while the hurricane tried to tear apart everything around them. The cabin wouldn't survive. Kalen knew that now, but they might. The stone corner held. The foundation beneath them stayed solid. And somewhere in the chaos, something shifted between them. Two people from different worlds, finding common ground in shared loss and the simple act of survival. The boy started speaking, quiet words in Apache that Ken couldn't understand. But the rhythm felt like a prayer or a story. His voice steady despite the pain. Despite the fear, Kalen listened, adding his presence to whatever the child was trying to do. Hours crawled past. The storm's fury gradually lessened from impossible to merely violent. The roar faded to howling wind, then to strong gusts, then finally to the sound of rain on broken wood. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the destruction, Kalen carefully shifted his weight. His back screamed from staying in one position all night. The boy stirred, blinking in the dim light. "It's over," Kalen said. "We made it." He stood slowly, helping the boy to his feet. The cabin was devastated. 3 walls still stood barely. The roof was half gone. Everything Kalen owned was either destroyed or scattered across the territory, but they were alive. The boy limped toward what used to be the door, now just an opening in the broken wall. Kalen followed, stepping over debris, into the early morning light. Then he stopped. The boy stopped. They both stood absolutely still, staring at what the dawn revealed. The hillside around Kalen's property was covered with warriors. Not a dozen, not 50, hundreds of them mounted on horses arranged in perfect lines that stretched from the eastern ridge to the western creek bed. They sat motionless in the gray light, facing the cabin, faces painted, weapons visible for 100 men, maybe more, all of them watching, waiting. The boy beside him whispered something in Apache that sounded like a name. And Ken understood with perfect and terrible clarity that everything he thought about this situation was wrong. The boy wasn't lost. He was being searched for by an entire nation. One of the warriors in the front line raised his hand. Not a threat, a signal. Kalen's heart hammered against his ribs. His mouth went dry. Every story he'd ever heard about frontier justice, about tribal revenge, about what happened to settlers who crossed invisible lines, all of it flooded his mind at once. The boy stepped forward, limping but steady, and spoke clear words that carried across the silent morning. And every single warrior remained perfectly, impossibly still, not advancing, not retreating, just watching. The silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Kalen's hand instinctively moved toward the blade at his belt, then stopped. For 100 armed warriors, 1 knife. The mathematics were brutally simple. 3 riders separated from the front line, moving forward at a slow walk. Their horses picked careful paths through the debris field the tornado had created. Shattered wood, torn fabric, pieces of Kalen's life scattered across mud that used to be packed earth. The center rider was older, maybe 60, his face weathered like canyon stone. He wore more elaborate dress than the others. Painted symbols across his chest that Kalen didn't recognize, but understood meant authority. A leader, possibly the leader. The boy beside Kalen straightened despite his injured ankle, lifting his chin. He spoke again, longer, this time gesturing at the destroyed cabin, at Kalen, at his own wounded leg. His voice carried the formal tone of someone making a report, not a plea. The older warrior's eyes moved from the boy to Kalen and stayed there measuring, judging, looking for something Kalen couldn't name. Then the man dismounted, smooth despite his age. The other 2 warriors did the same. They walked forward, closing the distance to 20 feet. Then 10. Kalen forced himself to stand still. Every instinct screamed to move, to defend, to do something other than wait for whatever came next. But running was pointless and fighting was suicide. So he waited. The leader stopped 5 feet away. Up close, Kalen could see the deep lines around his eyes, the scars on his hands, the gray threading through black hair worn long. This was a man who'd survived more battles than Kalen had lived years. The warrior spoke. His voice was deep, controlled, each word precisely shaped despite the language barrier between them. Kalen shook his head slowly. I don't understand. The boy limped forward, positioning himself between them. He spoke to the leader in Apache, then turned to Kalen and pointed at his own chest. Nanton, then at the older warrior, father. Kalen's stomach dropped. The boy wasn't just any tribal member. He was the son of whoever commanded this massive gathering. And Kalen had just spent the night alone with him in a destroyed cabin. The leader, Nanton's father, studied Kalen's face for a long moment. Then he did something completely unexpected. He removed a leather cord from around his own neck, a simple thing woven with small beads, and held it out. Kalen stared at the offered gift confused. Take, Nanton said quietly, the English word carefully formed. I don't. Kalen looked from the cord to the leader to the boy. I don't understand what this means. Nantan spoke to his father. A quick exchange. The leader nodded then, placed his right hand over his heart and bowed his head just slightly. But the gesture was unmistakable. Respect. The boy turned back to Ken. You protect Stormbad. He struggled for the word, settled on gesturing to the ruined cabin, to his ankle, to himself, still alive and standing. Save. I just Ken's. Voice came out rougher than intended. He was hurt. There was a storm. I couldn't leave a child to die. Nantan translated. His father's expression shifted. Not softening exactly, but something in the hard lines eased. He spoke again longer. This time, and though Ken couldn't understand the words, he caught the rhythm of them. The tone. This wasn't a threat or a warning. It was a story. The boy listened, then turned to Kalen with an intensity that seemed too old for his young face. Father say it's many men see child. Apache child. He made a gesture pushing away. Rejection. They wouldn't help, Kalen said quietly. Yes. Afraid. Hate both. Nan pointed at Kalen. Afraid. I was terrified, Kalen admitted. The boy's lips twitched, almost a smile. Yes. But help this. He gestured at the cord his father still held. Big honor, father say. You. Heart good. Kalen took the cord with hands that trembled slightly. The leather was worn smooth from years of wear. The beads carefully chosen and placed. This wasn't a trinket. This was something that had meaning. Wait. History. Tell him. Kalen struggled to find words. Tell him I'm grateful, but I didn't do it for honor. I did it because he's a child. Nantan translated. His father nodded slowly, then spoke again. The boy listened, his expression growing. More serious. Father say that why you have honor, on honor you want. Child safe. Nanan pause this while we come all warriors show you. We know we remember. Kalen looked past them at the hundreds of mounted warriors still sitting motionless in the dawn. Light. Not an attack force, a witness. They'd come to acknowledge what he'd done to make sure everyone, settlers and Apache alike, knew that one man had crossed the invisible line and chosen humanity over fear. But something else nagged at him. How did you find us in the storm? In the dark? How did you know where he was? Nantan's father smiled for the first time. He pointed at the mountains, then made a sweeping gesture across the valley. When he spoke, the boy translated, We always know where you are. The words hung in the air like smoke. We always know where you are. Not a threat, a statement of fact. The Apache had been watching Kalen's isolated homestead for 7 years, aware of his presence, his solitude, his grief. They'd known, and they'd left him alone. Until last night, when he'd proven himself worthy of something more than isolation. You've been watching me, Kalen said slowly. All this time, Nantan's father spoke and the boy translated. Fathers say, when you come here, you bring sadness. We know. This sadness. We have same. He pointed at several of the mounted warriors. Many fathers lose sons. Many sons lose fathers. This land, he gestured at the vast territory around them. Much sadness here. Kalen felt something crack open in his chest. 7 years he'd carried the weight alone, convinced that nobody could understand what it meant to bury a child, to keep living when the reason for living was gone. But these men knew. They'd watched him build his exile out of grief and recognized it. Because they'd done the same. My son's name was Thomas, Ken said. The name foreign on his tongue after so long. Silent. He was 8, same age as. He looked at Nantan. 8 seasons, the boy confirmed. He went into the water after our dog during a flash flood. Current took him before I could reach them. Kalen's voice stayed level through practice. Through years of keeping the story locked behind his teeth, found them both downstream 3 days later. Nan translated quietly. His father's expression didn't change, but his hand moved to rest on his son's shoulder. a gesture of protection, of gratitude, of acknowledgement that things could have been different. The leader spoke again longer this time, and Nantan struggled to find the English words. Father say you save his son, but this he paused. Searching. You save you too. 7 winters you alone. Heart sleeping now. You wake. Kalen wanted to argue. To say that saving one child didn't erase losing another didn't fix the whole that. Thomas had left, but standing there in the ruins of his cabin, surrounded by warriors who'd come to honor a simple act of humanity, he felt something shift. Not healing, not forgiveness, but maybe the first step toward remembering how to be more than just a man waiting to die. What happens now? Kalen asked. Nantan's father gestured at the destroyed cabin, at the scattered remains of Kalen's possessions, then spoke. We help. Nantan translated build new house, better, stronger. I can't accept. The leader held up one hand, stopping him. He spoke firmly, and though Kalen couldn't understand the words, he understood the tone. This wasn't charity. This was obligation. Nantan had been saved, and the debt must be acknowledged in ways that held meaning. Fathers say, choose help. We choose help. This our way. Nantan's young face was serious. You give honor to us. We give honor to you. This how it be. Call looked at the leather cord still in his hand, then at the hundreds of warriors who'd ridden through the night to witness this moment. He thought about 7 years of isolation, of choosing to hide from the world because the world had taken everything from him. And he thought about the split-second decision last night to grab a bleeding child and pull him inside despite the risk, despite the fear, despite everything. Maybe Nantan's father was right. Maybe he'd saved more than just the boy. All right, Kalen said quietly. Thank you. The leader nodded once, then turned and spoke to his warriors in a voice that carried across the valley. The response was immediate, a unified sound, not quite a shout, more like thunder made from human voices, and acknowledgement, a promise. 3 warriors dismounted and approached, and Ken tensed until he realized they were carrying supplies, food, blankets, medicine, basic necessities for someone whose home had just been destroyed. They placed them near what remained of the cabin's walls, nodded respectfully, and returned to their horses. Nantan limped closer to Kalen. I go now with father, but we come back. Help build. He paused, then added in careful English. You, friend. The word hit harder than Ken expected. Friend, when was the last time anyone had called him that? When was the last time he'd let anyone close enough to use that word? You're a brave kid. Kalen said. Your father should be proud. Nantan translated, and his father's stern expression finally broke into something that might have been a smile. He placed his hand on Kalen's shoulder. Brief contact, but waited with meaning, then turned toward his horse. The boy followed, moving carefully on his injured ankle. Kalen watched them mount, watched the leader raise his hand in a signal that rippled through the gathered warriors. They began to move, not in retreat, but in organized departure, flowing like water around the destroyed homestead. But even as they rode away, Kalen noticed something. 20 warriors stayed behind, dismounting near the tree line, setting up what looked like a temporary camp, watching, protecting. The isolation was over. For better or worse, Kalen Reed was no longer alone in his grief. He was connected now to a boy he'd saved, to a people who'd claimed him as worthy, to a future that looked nothing like the empty years he'd planned. And somewhere in his chest, where the numbness had lived for so long, he felt the faint, uncomfortable stirring of something that might eventually become hope. 3 days after the storm, the sound of hoof beats pulled Ken from his work. He'd been sorting through debris, salvaging what little remained intact, a few tools, some cooking pots bent but usable, pieces of lumber that might serve for rebuilding. The mayor had returned on her own the morning after the tornado, scratched and spooked, but alive. 5 riders approached from the east. Not Apache settlers from the look of their clothes and saddles. Kalen recognized two of them, Morgan and his son Cyrus, from the nearest settlement. The others were strangers, but their expressions told him everything he needed to know about why they'd come. They reined in 20 feet from where Ken stood. The 20 Apache warriors who'd stayed behind moved into visible positions along the tree line. Not threatening, just present. Morgan's eyes tracked them nervously. Reed. Morgan's greeting was curt. Heard you had some trouble with the storm. Cabins. Gone. Callan confirmed. But I'm alive. Yeah, we heard about that too. Morgan shifted in his saddle. Heard you had company during the storm. Apache company. Kalen waited, saying nothing. That true? You shelter one of them. A child, Kalen said. Injured child caught. In the storm. What was I supposed to do? Let nature take its course, one of the strangers said. His voice carried the flat certainty of someone who'd made up his mind before arriving. We got enough problems out here without inviting more. I didn't invite anything. A hurt kid showed up at my door in the middle of a tornado, and now you got Apache warriors camped on your land. Cyrus spoke for the first time, young and aggressive. You know what that looks like? Looks like you're picking sides. Callan felt anger rise in his chest, hot and sharp. I'm not picking anything. I helped someone who needed help. That's all. That's not all. Morgan's tone hardened. Words spreading. You made an alliance with them. Accepted their gifts. Some folks are saying you can't be trusted anymore. Some folks can think what they want. You don't get it, do you? The stranger leaned forward. You're making it harder. For the rest of us. We got a balance out here, thin as it is. You tip that balance, and people on both sides start thinking different. Start thinking maybe the old rules don't apply anymore. Maybe they shouldn't, Ken said quietly. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Morgan's hand moved toward the rifle at his saddle, then stopped. He glanced at the Apache warriors watching from the trees, calculating odds that didn't favor anyone if shooting started. You're making a mistake, Morgan said finally. You're choosing them over your own people. I chose a child over a storm. If that makes me a traitor to people like you, I can live with it. You might have to. Cyrus's voice carried a threat that his father didn't contradict. They rode away without further words, but Kalen knew this wasn't over. The frontier ran on fear and suspicion, and he just violated both by refusing to see an enemy in a wounded boy. Some people would never forgive that kind of betrayal to their comfortable hatred. That afternoon, more Apache arrived. Not warriors this time, but families, men and women carrying tools, pulling travois loaded with what already cut and prepared. They worked without asking permission, without expecting conversation, moving with practiced efficiency that spoke to generations of building and rebuilding. Kalen tried to help, but an older woman gently pushed him toward the shade, gesturing that he should rest. He was still recovering from the night of the storm, bruised and exhausted in ways he hadn't fully acknowledged. So he sat and watched as his cabin rose from ruins. Not exactly as it had been. Better actually, stronger foundation. Reinforced corners, a design that would survive the next storm with less damage. They worked in shifts, some building, while others prepared food, organized supplies, cared for children who played at the edge of the work site. Nanton appeared in the afternoon, his ankle wrapped, but bearing weight now. He limped over to where Ken sat and dropped down beside him with the casual fearlessness of the young. Father, send medicine, the boy said, holding out a small leather pouch. For hurt inside. He touched his chest. Not body hurt, heart hurt. Kalen took the pouch uncertain. What is it? Hurts for tea. Help with sadness. Sleep. Nantan struggled for the words. My mother, she not alive. 3 winters gone. Father, he have same sadness. Elder woman make. There. Help him not forget, but hurt less. The simple honesty of it hit Kalen harder than any elaborate condolence. This wasn't about fixing grief or pretending it didn't exist. It was about learning to live with it, to carry it, without letting it crush everything else. Thank your father for me, Ken said, and thank you for understanding. Nandan nodded, then pointed at the rising structure. Good house. Strong. You stay. I don't have anywhere else to go. Good. The boy smiled. You stay. We visit. Bring food. Tell stories. Be friends. Friends. There was that word. Again offered with such simple certainty by a child who'd almost died in his arms 3 days ago. A child whose people were rebuilding his life while his own people rode out to condemn him for basic human decency. Yeah, Call said, surprised too. Fighty meant it. We'll be friends. As the sun dropped toward the western hills, Kalen watched Apache families work on his home and understood that something fundamental had changed. The isolation he'd built so carefully around. His grief was gone, torn apart by a storm and child's need. In its place was something uncertain and complicated, and far more dangerous than solitude, but also possibly something worth the risk. The new cabin took shape over the course of a week. Kalen had expected it to take months working alone, but with help it rose quickly, walls sturdy and straight, roof properly sealed, even a reinforced cellar dug into the earth for storms yet to come. The Apache builders worked with materials they understood intimately, knowledge passed down through generations of adapting to this harsh land. On the 8th day after the storm, Kalen woke before dawn and made tea from the herbs Nantan had brought. The brew tasted bitter and earthy, nothing pleasant about it. But as he sat watching the sun rise through his new window, he noticed something. The usual weight on his chest, the one that had made breathing feel like work for 7 years, had eased slightly. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. Thomas's boots still sat by the door. Kalen had retrieved them from the wreckage and placed them in the same spot they'd occupied in the old cabin. But this morning, he looked at them differently, not as relics of a life stopped short, but as reminders of a life that had existed. His son had lived, had laughed, had been brave enough to try saving a dog from flood water, even though it cost him everything. That kind of courage deserved better than a father who hid from the world. Footsteps on the porch pulled him from his thoughts. Nanton appeared in the doorway, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. You come early, Kalen said. Father, send. The boy held out the bundle. For Wall, Kalen unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a painted piece of hide, small enough to fit in his palm, decorated with symbols he was starting to recognize. A storm, eh? Shelter, 2 figures, one large, one small. It tells story, Nanton explained. Your story, so people remember. So children know what you do. I didn't do anything special. You did. The boy's voice was firm. Many men see me. They, right away, afraid, angry. You know right away. You come help. This special. Callan turned the painted hide in his hands, feeling the smoothness of the leather, seeing the care that had gone into each precise line of paint. Someone had taken time to document what had happened to turn a simple act of shelter into something worth preserving. Your father made this elder woman. She makes story pictures. Keep history. Nan pointed at the symbols. This one you. This one me. This one storm. This one. He touched the symbol for shelter. Safety. Home. Home. Kalen looked around his new cabin. It was better than the old one in almost every practical way. But what made it home wasn't the stronger walls or tighter roof. It was the fact that it had been built by hands that cared, raised by people who'd chosen to honor him with their labor and presence. Thank the elder woman for me, Kalen said. I'll hang it where I can see it every day. Nantan smiled, then grew serious. Father say more settlers come soon. Angry settlers they know. Understand. Think you betray them. I know they already came once. Father say, if you want Apache warriors stay. Protect. Kalen considered this. Having Armed warriors on his property would solve one problem but create 10 others. It would confirm every suspicion the settlers had, mark him as an enemy beyond redemption. But sending them away meant facing whatever came along. Tell your father I appreciate the offer, Kalen said carefully. But I think it's better if I handle my own people myself. Having warriors here will only make things worse. Nantan translated this to himself, working through the English then. Nodded. You brave. Stupid maybe, but brave. Despite everything, Ken laughed. Yeah, probably stupid. Father says stupid and brave look same sometimes. The boy grinned. But be alone. We watch far away but watching. If bad trouble. Come, we see. It should have felt invasive, knowing he'd always be observed. Instead, it felt oddly comforting. For 7 years, he'd been alone by choice, convincing himself that solitude was safety. Now he understood what he'd really been doing, punishing himself for surviving when Thomas hadn't. But Thomas wouldn't have wanted that. His son had been brave, reckless, full of life that burned bright even if it burned short. Honoring that life meant living fully, not hiding in shadows built from guilt. I need to ask you something, Kalen said. That day, when the storm was coming, why were you alone? Where were the others? Nanton's expression shifted, something like embarrassment crossing his young face. Training, learning to track. I go too far. Think I find better trail. Then, storm come fast. I try go back, but wind push me wrong way. Fall hurt leg. Then, just run. Find shelter. You got lost. Call said gently. Yes. Stupid father. Angry, but also proud. I survive. I brave enough, ask help from he gestured at. Kalen from stranger from someone different. Kalen finished. Yes. Different but good different. Nantan stood preparing to leave you. Good different too. This why we help this why. Father send warriors. You show us. Not all settlers same. Not all fear what they know understand. After the boy left, Kalen hung the painted hide on the wall beside the door. From that spot, anyone entering would see it. Immediately, a testament to a night when the world tried to tear itself apart, and two people from different worlds chose survival over surrender. The cabin was nearly finished. The settlers would come again, probably with more threats and less patience. The path ahead was complicated, dangerous, and nothing like the isolated peace he'd planned for his remaining years. But sitting in his new home, made strong by hands that didn't have to help him, honored by people who didn't know him anything, Ken felt something he hadn't felt since the day he'd buried his son. He felt alive. 2 weeks after the storm, they came at dawn. 12 riders this time, not 5. Morgan led them, but there were harder faces among them now. Men from settlements farther out. Men who'd heard rumors and decided Kalen Reed needed to answer for his choices. Kalen was repairing fence line when he saw them approach. He set down his tools slowly, wiped his hands on his pants, and walked to meet them at the property line. His new cabin stood solid behind him. Smoke rising from the chimney in the cool morning air. Reed. Morgan's greeting held no warmth. We need to talk about your situation here. Nothing to talk about, Ken said evenly. I helped a child. The child's people helped me rebuild. That's the whole story. That's not the whole story. A scarred man Callan didn't recognize urged his horse forward. You've made yourself something different now. Not settler, not Apache, something in between. That makes you dangerous to everyone. I'm not dangerous to anyone. You're dangerous to the way things work out here. The man gestured broadly at the land around them. We got boundaries, rules. You crossed them. The only thing I crossed was my own doorway. To pull a dying child out of a storm and accepted their gifts and let them build your house. And now you were their token. Around your neck. Morgan pointed at the leather cord Nanton's father had given him visible at Ken's collar. You've chosen their side. I didn't choose a side. Ich chose humanity. That's not how it works out here, the scar man said. You're either with us or against us. And right now you look pretty against us. Callan felt his anger rise, but kept his voice level. Then I guess I'm against you. If being with you means leaving children to die in storms, I'll stand against that every single time. The 12 riders shifted, hands moving toward rifles. The morning suddenly felt very quiet, very dangerous. Kalen's hands stayed at his side, but he measured the distance to his own cabin, calculating whether he could reach cover before they decided talking was finished. Then hoof beats echoed from the north ridge. Everyone turned. Warriors appeared along the ridgeline, dozens of them sitting motionless on their horses against the pale sky. Then more emerged from the western tree line, more still from the south. Within minutes, Kalen's property was surrounded again. Not 400 this time, but enough. More than enough to make the 12 settlers reconsider their position. Nantan rode at the front of the nearest group. His injured ankle healed enough for riding. His father was beside him, and the older man's face showed no emotion, only watchful readiness. They've been watching, Morgan said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. The whole time they've been watching. Yes, Kalen confirmed. They watch over their friends. The scar man's face reened with rage. This is exactly what we're talking about. You've brought them into settler business, made us all targets. You made yourselves targets when you rode on my land with threats. Kalen's voice stayed calm, but steel ran through it. I didn't ask for protection. They offered it because they know what honor means. Maybe you should learn. For a long moment, nobody moved. The settlers were outnumbered and outpositioned. Any fight would end badly for them, and they knew it. But pride and fear made men do stupid things. Morgan finally spoke. This isn't over. Reed. Yeah, Kalen said. It is. You can accept that I'm going to live my life the way I choose, or you can keep coming back and finding Apache warriors waiting. Your choice. They rode away, slowly, trying to preserve dignity and retreat. But Kalen knew what they'd seen had shaken them, not just the warriors. The fact that Kalen stood his ground, refused to back down, chose principle over safety. After the settlers disappeared over the eastern ridge, Nantan's father dismounted and approached. He spoke briefly in Nantan. Translated, fathers say, you brave man, stand alone against many. This good, but you don't need stand alone anymore. Understand, Kalen said, and I'm grateful. The leader smiled slightly, then spoke again. Nantan's translation came softer. Fathers say, you save his. So, we save you. This fair, this right, you family now, family. The word settled into Ken's chest with unexpected weight, not replacing what he'd lost. Nothing could do that but adding something new, something he hadn't known he needed until a wounded child crawled toward his door during the worst storm in years. Tell your father, Kalen said carefully, that I'm honored to be part of his family. After they left, Kalen stood in his yard looking at the new cabin, at the repaired fences, at the land he'd chosen for isolation that had become something entirely different. The morning sun warmed his face. Birds called from the trees. Life continued, changed. But moving forward, he thought about Thomas, about the brave boy who'd run into flood water to save dog. And he thought about Nantan, the brave boy who trusted a stranger when he had every reason not to. Two boys, two kinds of courage, teaching him the same lesson from opposite sides of his grief. Some things couldn't be saved, but some things could. And choosing to save what you could, regardless of fear or consequences, was how you honored the things you'd lost. Kalen walked back to his fence line and picked up his tools. There was work to do. There would always be work to do. But now he didn't face it alone. And that made all the difference. The man who'd hidden from life for 7 years was gone, torn apart by a hurricane and rebuilt by hands that knew how to make broken things stronger. In his place stood someone different, someone who understood that walls built from grief keep out more than pain. They keep out everything worth living for. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another tale from the frontier where courage and choice collide in unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you stories that matter. Your support means